Welcome to this first episode of Across the Divides, which I intend in the future to grow into more of a live conversation between people of differing viewpoints, because if we are to ever inhabit a unified kingdom, we have to find ways to confront the conflicts that exist between people and to find common ground, to realize that there's more that unites us than divides us. And for this first episode, I've chosen to deal with the subject of water, which is an issue which is alive for me at the moment, and a subject that I've become more and more interested in over the past 10 years, really, since I first discovered water fasting. I had experimented with juice fasting many times over the years, and all sorts of different cleanses, health cleanses, in order to sustain a healthy body and mind. And one day I eventually met a woman who's, she had been suffering from all sorts of supposed autoimmune diseases and the dreaded Big C. And all of these health issues, as well as many others, were resolved in the process of her discovering water fasting. She also used other complementary therapies at the same time, but she is absolutely persuaded that it was water fasting that really had the most profound effect on her health. And it was during these water fasts, she did 2 40-day water fasts. It was during those fasts that she saw the final resolution of some of these really acute and chronic healing health crises that she had been suffering. So when I met her and she said, well, juice fasting, that's really more juice feasting, I was encouraged to experiment with water fasting. And it was there that I realized myself how profoundly just connecting with water, just drinking water, it could be sufficient to facilitate massive changes in health and well-being. And I found it not only a really powerful catalyst for my own personal healing, but I also found it pretty much initiated a reawakening of spiritual consciousness, one might say. I felt clearer, cleaner, smarter, brighter, more uplifted and motivated than I ever had. And as such, I began fasting regularly. I now fast usually for about a day every week. I usually do kind of intermittent fasting till lunchtime nearly every day. I give myself a holiday every weekend. Saturdays are for celebrations and Sundays are for being with family. But then during the week I intermittent fast. But this daily fast, or this fast once a week where I drink water, I find really rejuvenating. And usually once or twice a year I have a much more sustained fast. My longest fast so far was 23 days last year, which I undertook during Lent, just as I had gone through a real dark night of the soul. I'd been through an awful couple of years, and that fast really put me back on track and really gave me the sense of how much life is worth living, despite having been through some really, really full-on personal challenges. So I've developed this very strong relationship with water, and because of water fasting, I've really, when one depends solely on water for nourishment, one wants to find the best quality water that one can. And so I don't want to have it in plastic bottles. I don't want to drink it straight out of the taps. So I've explored various different kinds of processing water and filtering it, and I'm still trying to find a good local spring that I can drink from. But I have also come to understand about the 4th phase of water and how profoundly activated water can stimulate good health. And so I began to spin my water through vortices that are where the water passes down through a magnet or a series of magnets in order to remove any electrical charge and to effectively erase the memory of water, which might sound like a bizarre concept to some people. But this process of activating water, which can be scientifically established, it's the fourth phase of water, has had many studies written about it. It's now an accepted fact that we have this fourth phase of water, which is almost like a goo. It's a structured form of water that all of our living cells depend upon. And as such, I now sing to water nearly every day, which might sound bizarre, but I also conduct water rituals where I do this with other people, and I've had people testify to the fact that the taste of the water is radically improved through this process of singing and spinning through magnets and activating the water. I suppose in the past they would have just called it holy water or blessing of the water, or water being activated by intent, but it goes far more. Well, intent is a powerful thing, but it goes beyond, let's just say, what some people might consider hippie woo-woo. So when I moved into this flat that I'm now living in after this dark night of the soul, I was astounded by, in a very negative way, by the foul odour of the water coming out of the taps here. It's clearly really highly chlorinated, and to me it doesn't seem right to pay money to profit-making companies for the provision of a substandard product. Why should I be forced to pay under threat of duress and fines for something which is inadequate? Now, I really empathise with the water boards, and you'll hear in this letter that I have written to Southern Water, it kind of gives a lot of context to why I'm writing to them. It's the second letter that I've written. And I really empathise with their situation. I really want that to be clear, that I'm not just trying to dodge a bullet. I'm not just trying to reduce my outgoings. I'm trying to live in accordance with what seems right to me. It doesn't seem right to give money to companies that are making profit for doing something which they're not doing effectively. Even if I understand that they're basically facing an impossible task. So it's a really confusing situation, and I couldn't not raise my voice. I couldn't just quietly pay and go along with things as we're generally expected to do. I really wanted to express my dissatisfaction, make them an offer that I considered reasonable, and I have a feeling that there will be a few people that will be interested in how this comes across. So this is the second letter. And I'll leave out, obviously, the precise details at the top of the letter. But it goes as such. Dear Southern Water, following up on my first letter dated September 27th, I'm writing to make an offer as a contribution to your work. Since I moved into this flat on the seafront in St Leonard's in March 2025, I haven't paid for any water because when I arrived, I was immediately struck by the awful smell of the water coming out of the taps. My immediate instinct was that I could not possibly pay for a water supply that stank like that. Since then, I've complained to Southern Water, and after a period of some months of delay, 2 inspectors finally attended my flat to carry out tests. Whilst here, the 2 inspectors agreed that the smell of water was indeed very strong. They took the samples and began some immediate testing, and then sent off further samples to a laboratory to run tests. In the aftermath of those tests, I was informed that my water supply was in accordance with the currently accepted norms and that I should consider my water supply fit for purpose. While the inspectors were visiting my property, they explained how chlorine levels in this area are comparable to those found in bigger cities like Brighton and London. However, my property had levels which were way above what was typically found in this area, and my supply registered in the upper limits of acceptable chlorine levels. Since then, during the winter period, there was an issue with the local water supply, which meant that all of the properties in this building were issued with emergency bottled water, and the odour of the water increased even further. Subsequent to this outage, we've also had issues with the outlets of sewage and other detritus into the sea. Recently, there was a huge deposit of biobeads unleashed into the waters close to Hastings, and there has also been detritus from shipping containers spread along the beaches. So I have some points to make with regards to this whole situation. Firstly, I am not your typical water customer. Every day I facilitate a water ritual that I have shared not only with the local community as part of a weekly ceremony, raising our awareness of human relationships with water, that's something I do as part of the Church of Wow, but also with groups around the country. I was even requested to perform a water ritual as part of a water awareness event paid for by a neighbouring water authority in Eastbourne. I've studied water a great deal and I consider myself somewhat of an expert, an advocate who can speak on water's behalf because I care deeply about our relationship with it as human beings. We depend upon water for health and longevity, and so it is of crucial importance that we develop a proper relationship to it. I personally ask for forgiveness for any negative impact that I may have had upon the cleanliness of our water supply. I say this for you to understand that I am really keen to maintain a good relationship with Southern Water, because I would actually like to help you in restoring a proper relationship with this fundamental element upon which we all depend. When I first received confirmation that my water supply did in fact stink by the 2 inspectors that were present in my flat, I was relieved to see that it wasn't purely subjective. Receiving the report from those thorough tests carried out on my water supply, however, only proved the suitability of this water for drinking and bathing to the levels set by the government. These figures are perpetually massaged, as has been seen in numerous situations where acceptable levels of pollutants are established. They are only set in accordance with levels which can be tolerated in order not to induce mass poisoning. Rarely do governmental standards account for long-term effects of low-level poisoning. Meeting standards set by the government does not mean that these levels are actually fit for human consumption. We only have to look at, scandals in the past like thalidomide and asbestos and all sorts of other government-approved substances that were deemed as appropriate for public consumption, and the catastrophic effects of those how would you say it? Those approvals that were given. Also, there were many things that were excluded from the water testing, which I think are of massive importance when considering the potability of water. There was no testing for levels of glyphosate, statins, SRSIs, and other medications. Neither was there any assessment for other drugs. I know cocaine has been found when local streams were tested. There is no level shown in the test results for the presence of hormones like testosterone and estrogen and other endocrine disrupting chemicals produced by plastics and other molecules whose effect can be directly observed upon the population. Many of the modern health crises we can see today can be linked to the quality of our water supply. Just as a side note, my daughter has a group of friends, of about 30 friends that she grew up with. She's now 21. Of that group of friends, there was not a single boy who wasn't homosexual. Now, that could be anecdotal and a question of taste, but we can see that there is an enormous preponderance of homosexuality and people identifying with different genders that has occurred in the last 20 years, let's say. And it's rarely spoken about in terms of where this may come from. Now, many years ago, there was an outrageous piece that was attached to Alex Jones, where he was exploring experiments that had been done in frogs, where frogs had been shown to change gender and become gay, basically, but even actually physically changing gender as a result of trace elements in their water. And that research was then reproduced and has been shown that there are chemicals. I think glyphosate is one of them, which has been shown to really seriously disrupt human reproductivity, and also what would you call it? Gender assignment, I suppose, but from a biological basis. And it seems to not really be appreciated quite how significant it is. So many people that are wrestling with the subject of gender, not realizing that this probably comes to our water supply, comes back to chemical effects, and that is ultimately a result of poisoning. So I didn't know how to really express that in a erudite way in a letter, but that's out there. Southern Water faces an almost impossible task in trying to cleanse the water supply, considering the massive amounts of pollutants introduced by the local population. Although I understand that you have an uphill battle, this does not infer that I should have to pay for water which is of such dubious quality. Personally, I choose to bathe in the sea nearly every day and to drink as much water as I can from alternative supplies so as to prevent myself from suffering the toxic effects of this water, both through the skin and from being directly consumed. The extremely high chlorine levels found in the water are there to prevent the spread of bacterial elements, which have not been removed during normal processing. This goes to underline the impossible task of trying to clean water in which thousands of people have been allowed to excrete. In my personal opinion, Southern Water should be campaigning for a complete overhaul of the water system because the task confronted by a water authority, given our current sewage system, is untenable. Apart from marine life, no other animal shits in its own water supply. Instinctually, this is understood as being completely wrong. And so animals, other than those living in the sea, always defecate onto the earth, which has the capacity to regenerate. Furthermore, the enormous quantities of medication being consumed by the population, which can only be partially removed from the water supply, means that the toxic load of medication in every glass of water drunk can be correlated to the enormous problems we see in public health. I only offer these points as context. I'm obviously alluding to what I was mentioning earlier. As previously stated in my last email to Southern Water, I have no inclination to pay for a water supply or to pay money to a water board that has been so careless in its management of the water system, which I say in regard to the environmental damage caused to our beaches in recent months and to the ongoing releases of sewage into the sea. I would love to take advantage of local fish, and yet I have met fishmongers who cannot stock local fish because of the overwhelming smell of sewage when gutting and preparing local fish. They report the odour is so strong that they simply refuse to work with it anymore. This is a sign of how it affects local produce to such a degree that whatever standards are deemed fit for public health are clearly way below what humans would normally expect. So, I was trying to find a local fish supply. I wanted to have some local wild caught fish. And I went to a place in Bexhill where they said, we just do not supply local fish because when they have a whole load that comes in locally caught and go through the gutting process, they said you cannot believe the stench, and they just felt that they just couldn't serve that food anymore. So to summarise, I do not feel that the service provided by Southern Water is adequate in the following respects. My water supply, as corroborated by 2 of your inspectors, absolutely stinks. I do not wish to drink or bathe in this water directly. I pay for expensive filters every month in an attempt to cleanse the small amount of water I use for drinking, bathing and cooking. The water stinks so much that I have no inclination to bathe in it, and so normally I bathe in the sea, which is also not ideal given the sewage outlets and the pollution incidents that have been noted over recent months. The supply has been tested to some degree and deemed appropriate, and yet there are so many elements that have not been included in that study which have damaging effects on health that I do not consider these tests to be sufficient. Despite all the things that I have outlined above, the main point of concern that I have with Southern Water is on a point of law, and this is the only one I need you to respond to. Is there any obligation for me to pay for a service which I consider to be substandard? As I understand it, my consumer rights are protected if I go into any shop or buy any product or service which I deem to be faulty. Similarly, in accordance with the Terrorism Act, it is unlawful to fund any organisation who, by act or omission, endanger public health. I noted with interest the recent citizen's arrest of your CEO. Please could you point to the exact point of law, including the relevant act, statute and subsection, which obliges me to pay for a substandard product and obliges me to respond to any of your demands. This is the only question for which I'm looking for a response. Now, the reason I'm focusing particularly on that is because one of the things that I believe has to change in our society, and for me forms kind of the backbone of my ideas about the unified kingdom, is the idea of compulsion and slavery. When we are confronted by a corrupt system, a corrupt state, whether it's the HMRC or the local government or in this case, a private profitable corporation, then how is it that they think that they can force us to do something? Am I a slave? Am I obliged? And if so, I'm asking them to establish the exact points of law upon which their claims are based. Now, it's my guess that there is no point of law, and that basically they trade on everybody else's willingness to go along with things. So if I end up going to court with this regard, I want to be very clear what law it is that I have broken. Now, this letter, I've been very careful to make sure that that I'm making an offer, because I do not want to be taking a confrontational stance with them where, I'm asking questions. And as a sovereign being, and whether or not it's as a sovereign being, just as me, do I not have the right to ask questions? Only slaves don't get to ask questions. And I think that the veiled slavery, or not so veiled slavery, into which we are obliged to perform, or seemingly obliged to perform in modern society, is one of the key things that we need to address if we're going to evolve as humanity. So the only other way in which you could help me is to be able to point out a local spring, as I have been looking for alternative water sources, and it strikes me that you probably have some inside information as to where local springs are located. I've heard there is one near the seafront in Hastings, and it would aid me greatly if you could highlight any exact location. Thank you. Otherwise, I'm happy to offer you the equivalent of £5 a month as an act of goodwill in the hopeless task you face. So, if they cannot substantiate an obligation for me to pay them, or even in the case that they can, I'm making them an offer which I consider proportional to the amount of water that I use, and because I'm not saying I refuse to pay anything. I understand that they have this almost hopeless task, and I would really like to help them. But I will not be forced against my will, and I also feel like I want to make some contribution. P.S. My offer to contribute to your situation as an advisor or collaborator still stands. I'm aware of concerned members of the public who sit on public consultation boards on the subject of water. I wish to put myself forward for such a role, or to offer my service in a consultation position. I care very much about water quality and have solid ideas for how Southern Water could profitably improve the service. The sewage system may have served to make cleaner metropolitan areas at one time, but now that our population has grown to such a size and become dependent on junk food and drugs of every kind, the time constraints and the volume of processing renders your task impossible. You have too much water to process and too little time and resources. There are much better solutions and viable alternatives, but radical changes to the system would be required. Although you have sent me a standardised letter, I am not your typical customer. I have a profound understanding of water and its fourth phase. Nearly every day, I structure water using magnets and sound to revitalise the dead H2O arriving at my tap. As a celebrant, I incorporate activated water into all of my rituals, and I'm doing everything I can to publicise the importance of respecting water and realising how profoundly we depend on clean water for our health, our physical and mental well-being. I have participated in water rituals with other artists and other concerned members of the public who wish to re-establish a sustainable relationship with this element upon which we all depend. Part of the reason for my exploration of the subject was the result of water fasting, which I found transformative for my health. The most I have fasted in one sitting is 13 days, and this April I spent a whole 23 days fasting. Water has the power to regenerate our health and our entire ecosystem if properly treated. I think it's possible to radically improve public perception of the service you provide. If anyone on your management team is willing and able to consciously address the criticism I have laid out, I would love to have a conversation with them. If a representative of Southern Water is willing to enter into dialogue with me, at least to the extent that my point has been heard by another human being, I will be happy to consider paying a higher amount. It's very important to me that my points are understood. This would constitute real customer service. I'm sorry, until such a time as a genuine dialogue is initiated, I am unwilling to pay the full amount, especially due to financial penalties or legislative threats. This is a subject of vital importance, and I do not choose to comply without asking questions. Now, some people may think this is completely ridiculous, but it seems to me that we are at a time, or at least I should say, for me, I'm at a time in my life when I can no longer go along with things and tolerate things that don't make any sense to me. Before Christmas, I spent some very dark time where I found myself repeating a mantra almost of, I just can't do this anymore. I just cannot do this anymore. I've reached a breaking point. I've actually registered myself as sick. I'm officially sick. I'm off work. I simply cannot do it anymore. The rat race is so draining to me, and it seems like a different world is possible, and it will never arrive unless people say I've had enough. And so, speaking for myself, I've had enough. So although for some people this may seem just like a ridiculous curiosity, to me this really matters. And it's so funny because I didn't plan that my first episode of the Across the Divides would be concerning the subject of water, which is clearly a subject that has become so important to me over the years, but hey, here it is. So I hope you can see that I am really trying to reach across the divides. What are the divides here? It's the divide between customer, although I don't think you can really call someone a customer who has, is receives demands and menaces in order to pay for a service that they don't even want. But let's use the language of the moment. I am a consumer, I'm a customer, and they are suppliers. And I want to reach across that apparent divide because ultimately we're human beings. Those people at the water board are also human beings and also compelled to pay for that same water, which they probably know better than anyone is absolutely awful. I wouldn't mind betting that the CEO and other interested parties at Southern Water live off bottled water or water that they get from extremely expensive Berkey filters and such like. It's very interesting to me that Nestle, for example, what's the name of the guy that runs Nestle? Is it Alberto Bola, or is he I think he might be Farmer. There's this incredibly powerful head of Nestle who thinks that water should be a private commodity. I don't agree. And I bet that he drinks exclusively either bottled water or water from his own supply, his own well, his own water treatment supply in his garden. So it's interesting because the people that are often responsible for this are not affected by it. I realise that it's absolutely ridiculous in some sense the sort of proposals that I know could transform our earth and our quality of water, and how radical they seem, and yet how simply implemented they could be. It wouldn't be as challenging as people think for us to, instead of shitting in our water supply, we could be shitting into compost toilets and processing and reusing all of that good stuff and regenerating our agriculture system and removing so much of the load that is borne by the water boards. I'm really trying to reach across these apparent divides of customer and supplier to try and say, I recognize the problem that you face. There's ways that it can be addressed. I'm actually willing to help, promote, engage with, help to solve the problems that you're confronted by. I really empathize with the private companies that are bidding for contracts to run the water, because they probably didn't realize themselves quite how profoundly screwed that system is, how untenable it is, how unsustainable. And so how are we ever going to address this without, it seems to me that when there's an engine, a motor of society, and we're all cogs in this machine, unless we refuse to play our apparent role in that system, it'll just keep chundering on, it'll just keep chugging on. And so, I really hope that people can see the profound place from which this letter was written and from which I'm conducting these Across the Divides podcasts. This is just the first. I'm really looking forward to having live conversations with other people from the other sides of apparent divides. I hope that one day I will end up being able to talk in a podcast with someone from Southern Water. I think it could be really good for them to be seen to be engaging with public concerns in this way. But regardless, I think for now that brings me to the closure of this first Across the Divides podcast. So I wish you well. I hope that one day we see... No, it's not that I hope, because I really believe in a hope-free existence. I trust that one day we will see the arrival of a unified kingdom, where even if it's just for a brief moment in time, humans can carry on with each other in a spirit of kinship, and where we can really align with each other as fellow human beings spinning through space on this spaceship Earth. So, love be with you.